Good afternoon, and welcome on this beautiful, sun-drenched November afternoon as we gather together to celebrate and remember the life of John Dutton Conant Little, son, brother, husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, innovative scholar, mentor, and pioneer in his field. My name is Kit Novotny. I'm one of the co-ministers here at the First Parish in Lincoln. On behalf of our community, we welcome you today to this sacred space, a community church for people of all backgrounds, beliefs, and belongings. John was a longtime member with his family of the community here in Lincoln. And John's children share that while not a religious man, he had a deep sense of the profound, perhaps more so later in life. A deep appreciation for the ethical and a sense of sacred. And so we hope that no matter who you are, wherever you are in your own life's journey, you will feel most at home in this sanctuary today. Today we gather with sadness and also with gratitude to honor the long life of John Little, who passed away peacefully at the end of September at the ripe age of 96. We gather to remember, to tell stories, to grieve, to summon John's presence a little bit longer, and to bask in the life of his spirit just a little longer. To say goodbye and to let, as our Jewish siblings put it, his memory be a blessing. We thank you all for gathering here from near and far. And I also want to take a moment to honor those whose memory and whose spirit is with us, but who have gone on before John. Particularly, we remember and welcome the presence of spiritually John's wife, Elizabeth, and his sisters Margaret and Frances, and all those friends who've gone before him. We're grateful to have a service with some beautiful musical offerings punctuating our time together. So a warm thanks to Miranda Loud, our music director and organist, to Cassandra McDonald on trumpet, and to some family members who will offer some music a little later on. And now I invite you all to take a moment to breathe, to feel the force of life flowing through your own lungs, to arrive fully here in this space as we center our attention toward the task at hand, lifting up the life of John Little in its many chapters, adventures, roles, and relationships. I invite you now to rise as you wish, in body or in spirit, as we join together in these opening words, followed by singing together. Will you join me? We gather today at the end of a long life to celebrate. Love, like a carefully loaded ship, crosses the gulf between the generations. Therefore, we do not neglect the ceremonies of our passage. When we are born and when we die, when we plant and when we harvest. We live not by things, but by the meanings of things. So let us build memories in laughter and tears, from generation to generation. family in a spirit of prayer or meditation. We call on the presence of love, on the spirit of life, our source and our destination. We call on that which is best in people to dedicate this hour or so of remembrance, that our own spirits would be reminded both of our preciousness, our fragility, the fact that we are all temporary on this beautiful earth. And may we move through that awareness, that reawakening, with a sense of gratitude, giving over all that fills our hearts. Amen. We will have the honor of hearing from a number of people to share and celebrate the fullness of the life of John Little now. And there will be, following that time, as is our tradition here at First Parish, a time of open sharing. So if you find your own stories or memories bubbling up, we will have a chance to share those as well.
Family and friends of John, I'm deeply honored to stand here as John's colleague, mentee, friend, and holder of the John D.C. Little Professorship at MIT, a position that comes with immense responsibilities. John would often ask me 3 questions. Do you have a law in your name? What is the next big thing? And lastly, is humor up to par? That was John. He will always push us to invent, to dream, and to find laughter and carry on, even in the most challenging of times. He himself took humor to a deeper level, as profound surprises that delight us, enlighten us, and set our minds free. He surprised the world by showing how marketing could be done. He transformed the marketing from art to a science of process and precision, a way to scale extraordinary ideas for the ordinary to follow. He created an entire profession. He surprised us by showing how much capacity a person can have for others. Over the years, he welcomed numerous colleagues and students to his family Thanksgiving gatherings. I went in 2009, and I still have John's email message that says a lot about him. Here is the schedule. We will then go to the square dance in Lincoln, door-to-door red Subaru service. There are many other beautiful surprises from John. For his 80th birthday, he gave a talk on what I want to do when I grow up. Before retirement, he offered a new course on the singularity. For PhD recruiting, he decided to show our future students the best of MIT. We went stargazing. That was an evening in March 2012 on the MIT Kresge lawn. The group spanned 6 decades in age. But that night, we were all kids, especially John. The spark in his eyes, the pure childlike wonder, and the joy for the unknown will always stay with me. John, thank you. The singularity is indeed happening. In the many lives you touched and the many minds you inspired, you will live on forever. Thank you.
Meeting John in 1967 changed my life. I can't imagine where I would be today without all I learned from him all he did for me over the course of my professional life. After taking his marketing game class in the spring of 1967, John asked me to be his teaching assistant the following year, and that was my introduction to computers. Every week I'd take a box of punch cards to the basement of Building 26 and to run on market simulation on MIT's IBM 7094 computer. And then I'd come back the next day to try and figure out, okay, so what did I do wrong this time? Or collect the results, hopefully. When I graduated from Sloan in 68, John's recommendation got me a commission in the U.S. Public Health Service in a newly established management science group at NIH in Bethesda. That commission meant I'd avoid the draft for the Vietnam War. When my tour of duty in the Public Health Service was over ending in 1970, John recruited me to join Management Decision Systems with Glenn, and two other former students. Well, he didn't really offer me a job. I remember him telling me that if Nabisco signed their contract, then they'd have salary, they could pay salaries. And a few weeks later, I got a call from John's secretary that Nabisco had signed, and so I had a job. John believed you shouldn't spend money you don't have. Each month, we would meet to add up certain revenue, and that set the budget for computer time. It's sort of a quaint notion, not spending money you don't have today, but that fiscal philosophy was a key principle in Management Decision Systems startup years and helped the company grow for over 15 years. I learned so much more from John over the years. He taught me how to be a consultant and how to build models that managers would actually use. I learned that if your client likes to drink, you need to get the important work done before lunch. He taught me the value of sharing rewards widely. He taught me the value of stopping to think before answering a question. And I learned the value of keeping my mouth shut while he was thinking. I learned that when the phone rings at 11 o'clock at night, it's not necessarily bad news. It's just a good time to get work done. And in those days, John existed, I think, on like 4 hours sleep a night. 10 years ago, John honored me by asking me to interview him about Little's Law and marketing science for a segment of a promotional video Sloan School was producing. And that was followed by a 2.5-hour interview covering more of John's life for the Inform's Oral History Project. And both those videos are still online. In the course of those interviews, I learned a lot about John's early years. And one fact that I still can't completely get my head around is that when John was an undergrad at MIT and finished in 3 years rather than 4, he was editor of Voodoo, the MIT humor magazine. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with nerd humor, picture a cross between Boy's Life and Playboy, but without the pictures. It's not that I didn't think John had a sense of humor, because he really did. But looking back at the old issues of Voodoo, with John's name on the masthead, I can't see him responsible for some of those really horrible jokes. I can't assess how John's impact on queuing theory or traffic management or marketing science will be viewed in the future. But I realized from reading the tributes to him from others that my own experience with John was not unique. There are many others like me who learned so much from John and had their lives changed by that interaction. Over the years, I find myself repeating to ever younger colleagues the invaluable business and life lessons I gained from working with John. And I only hope I've been able to pass along some of John's wisdom. Thank you.
I'm Dilla Tingley, a neighbor, for a change of pace here. Fred and I found the Little family to be delightful neighbors on Laurel Drive for 60 years. We were willing recipients of tickets to the often controversial American Repertory Theater tickets. We also had many opportunities to experience John's expertise as a wine connoisseur. John and I shared a deep concern for the decline of lady slippers in our neighborhood. We would count them every year. We never learned the reason for the decline, but it is fun to remember traipsing through the woods with John, a man of such stature and accomplishments, counting lady slippers.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Dice. My mother was John's sister, so he was always known as Uncle John or Uncle Johnny to me. When I was a teenager, I was tapped by the Little family to be a mother's helper on Nantucket. And so I flew from Michigan to Massachusetts, and Aunt Betty and I and the kids traipsed off to Nantucket. And Uncle John stayed behind to work, and he would come down to the island when he could. So it was always fun when Uncle John would come because you never knew what was gonna happen. He, at the time, it was the mid-60s, he had become fascinated by an author you may have heard of and may not, named Euell Gibbons. Euell Gibbons had written a book called Stalking the Blue-Eyed Scallop, and it was all about foraging. And Uncle John decided that Nantucket was the perfect place to forage. So we would go and harvest things from the sea, mostly. We did try making rosehip pie, which was not a complete success, but it was okay. But it was better than the Whelk burgers we tried, which were, I should say Uncle John tried, because he was the moving force behind it. I was not. That was sort of like eating cooked rubber bands. And there was periwinkle omelet. That wasn't too bad. Then he got the brilliant idea to get me a clam license, and I don't know why. I'm only guessing it was I was old enough to have a clam license, and my cousins were not. Otherwise, they should have been out there clamming, not me. But I was the chosen one, and so there I was in a swamp, a saltwater swamp, what do you call it, saltwater marsh, up to my knees in mud, and I would feel things scuttle by, but I couldn't run because you can't run in mud up to your knees, and the bugs were biting, and Uncle John was having a wonderful time, and we were clamming for quahogs, which are hard-shelled clams, and I thought, well, this is about as much as I will have to put up with. But then we got back home, and he proceeded to shuck the clams and expect me to eat them raw. And my cousins were entranced by this. They thought this was great fun. Watch the babysitter cousin try to eat raw clams. And they kept saying, well, if you put enough cocktail sauce on it, just open your mouth and let it go down. Well, I couldn't do it, and I gagged. So my cousins very kindly made me a button that said clam gagger on it. They were charming at the time. Anyway, and so that is the first time and the last time that I ever tried to eat raw clams, thanks to Uncle John.
John was a real pioneer in operations research and marketing. And perhaps he's most well known for Little's Law, a famous law and queuing theory, and Steve's going to talk a bit about that. But it's interesting that John actually spent most of his academic career doing research on quantitative marketing, working on advertising response, brand response, decision support systems. And it's been a pleasure for me since 1966 when he hired me at MIT to work with him in those areas. His research was always the highest level of quality. He wasn't a man who produced many, many papers. He produced a few gems that were tremendous quality, rigor, and became the leadership papers in our field. In honor of that, the Professional Organization for Marketing Science established the John D.C. Little Award. And every year when John was living, he would present that award at the annual conference. And he always was part of the judging to find the most rigorous, attractive paper. John was also a leader at the Sloan School. He was the head of the management science group for almost 50 years and helped lead it to preeminence in the world in terms of reputation among business schools and operations research. One of those times it was very interesting that the dean, Dean Siegel at that time, was reorganizing the school, and he said, well, management science group did so well as a group of a third, we're going to put economics and finance as a third of the school and behavioral policy science as the other third. And that was the rest of the faculty who weren't economics or management science. These are people with behavioral science, organization studies, not quantitative at all. And John was selected to develop this group. And it really showed his skills as a leader because he was able to bring that group together and help them make a really important statement in the school. I remember other times when I would talk to John, I'd say, what are you doing? And he said, well, I can't tell you. And then I knew he was working on a project granted by the president of MIT on a high confidential status. And there were a lot of hours spent in that. He was widely respected among the leaders at MIT. In fact, as you may know, he's an institute professor, probably 10 institute professors at any given time. That's ultimate a faculty honor, not only for your research, but what you've contributed to MIT. So he's widely respected, but I also say to me, who was my mentor, when I was hired in 1966, he said, well, Glenn, you're probably not going to make it here. I said, but remember, MIT is a good place to be from. Well, I'm still not from. And John was my mentor in research and advocate. I would never have been a tenured professor, never have been the dean of the school without John's support behind it. So great memories professionally. Also, John is a friend, as was pointed out, a great lover of the sea. I'll share a few stories along that line. My wife Andrea and I, when we first came here in 1966, were invited to Nantucket. And John and Betty lived in a very small house, which is now part of a very large compound of Little's, but at that time very small and crowded. And John was a great entertainer and seafood. One of his featured events was to go to Great Point. And John was a great fisherman. The bluefish were running. John was casting, caught a fish, caught a couple more fish. The fish seemed to move off, and he said, well, let me show you a few things about casting. So he gave me a casting lesson and said, well, why don't you cast for bluefish? And I said, okay, and my amateur status doing this, I hooked up to this 16-pound bluefish, which attracted John and all the littles and everybody on the beach. Turned out to be the biggest bluefish of the year. And I said, it really hooked me on saltwater fishing for the rest of my life. Second story is when we were sailing in Maine, we visited John in Isle Ho, where of course, the Littles also have a family home on Isle Ho, and went in for the dinner. This featured event was pizza with sea urchin roe. I must say that was really good. Another habit John had was to carry a little pocket knife, and every time an oyster came by, a knife would come out, the oyster would pop, cleaned up, and either offered to you or eaten by him. So really developed my long run. appreciation of seafood. I didn't have to have a button, but. So the last little story was another sailing story. I was moving my blue water sailing boat from the British Virgin Islands to Turks and Caicos and asked John to join for a 5-day offshore sail. Of course, John loved it and caught tuna while we were drifting along on our sailboat. We got finally to Turks and Caicos, which, after a 5-day cruise, you're kind of glad to get off the shore. And John said, well, let's have a baseball game. And we said, well, we don't have any baseball bats. Ball. He said, well, we don't need that. We're going to have an invisible baseball game. And John called the strikes and the balls and the hits. And the 4 of us, the 2 crew plus John and me, played baseball. That was a time John was then leaving to come back home. The cruise was ending at that point for them. And John decided to take everybody on a search for the best painkiller in the Turks and Caicos. I don't know if you've been in the tropics, but painkiller is a very potent rum drink with juices. So after sampling a lot of these around the islands, we put them on the plane, and as I understand, he could be heard all the way back to Boston. So John knew how to play as well as work, as alluded to by a couple other people. So John was a giant and a friend, and saying he will not be forgotten.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm very honored to be here and to share some reflections on John. John was truly remarkable as a pioneer both in operations research and in marketing science. He was remarkable as a leader of his professional communities. And he was remarkable as a person, with the wisdom that he shared, with his ethical compass and commitment to always doing the right thing, with his skill in navigating delicate situations, and with his kindness and caring for his family, friends, and colleagues. As Glenn just mentioned, someone has to talk about Little's Law, so I don't have a blackboard. But in 1961, John provided the first general proof of a queuing formula that relates the average number in queue to the average wait time in the queue. At the time, the relationship was known for some queuing systems and was generally thought to be true. But no one had found the key for how to show this. John had a novel insight based on the physics of queuing systems. In his words, at the same time that a customer is standing in line and so can be counted, he or she is also accumulating minutes waiting. John used this insight to show that L equals lambda times W under very, very general conditions. Very simple, very elegant, incredibly robust, and extremely important. And as my colleague Dick Larson here will say, it may be little, but it's the law. Let me offer a couple personal reflections on John. John was practical. My very first contact with John was when he sent me a rejection letter for my application to the PhD program in the Operations Research Center. And then he went on to explain in the letter that I was rejected because I'd been admitted to the Sloan PhD program and they had given me a 1/6 fellowship. And the ORC had no fellowships to give. John was a multitasker. My next contact with John was my interview for a faculty job at Sloan, when John was one of only 2 attendees at my research seminar. During the seminar, he followed the content, he asked some very, very good questions, and he got in his afternoon nap. John was wise. After being on the faculty for 2 years, John stopped by my office with a letter from the dean with my salary for the next year. He sat down, handed me the letter to read, I read it, and then I asked John, well, thanks, John, but how am I doing? So John looked at me, asked for the letter back, he read it, he paused for a while, thinking. I paused for a while, thinking. and then he answered, "You got a higher percent raise than me." And that was it. And I think in hindsight, that was the right feedback. You're doing okay. More seriously, beyond being very practical, very wise, and a multitasker, John was an exceptional mentor to his colleagues, to his students in all respects. He was a very good listener. He knew how to provide useful and practical advice, and he was readily available. Indeed, I still remember his home phone number, 259-9172. Furthermore, he seemed to be doing a lot behind the scenes to help his colleagues. I can't cite you specific examples of this, other than the fact that we always felt that John had our back and that good things happened. John was a truly remarkable person as a mentor, a role model, a colleague, and a friend. He leaves an extraordinary legacy with his family and with the impact from his work and his leadership. May he rest in peace.
And they I'm Tom, one of the three brothers and my sister. A colleague once asked me what it was like to have my dad as a father. And I was kind of flustered by this question. He was just a dad. He did dad things. What was to say? He was the dad we got. But I think my colleague asked because, as I've been reminded recently and here, he and so many others benefited from his support and mentoring. And in my colleague's mind, we kids must have got a pretty good deal. One of the many things I admired about my dad is that he was curious, and he was always using data to explain things. I remember him telling about counting cars at intersections with little mechanical clickers to validate queuing behavior. We still have those clickers. He was meticulous with data collection. We recently found here in Lincoln detailed records about every run and every bike ride he did, including what time, his duration, what was the weather like, how many cars he passed, and what gear he used to get up Browning's Hill. In his career, he seemed to appear just when and where the action was. He programmed the early whirlwind computer at MIT. He worked with early barcode data to understand consumer behavior before this was a thing. I remember as a kid getting boxes of different consumer products, including ones that were not yet on the market, like Fresca, Mr. Pibb, if you remember that, New Coke, and lots of items in the biscuit category. Lorna Doones, animal crackers, Oreos, and seafood. We sampled a lot of frozen items, especially when Mom was traveling. That was lots of fun. I hope we didn't bias the data set. This was also around the time that my dad got involved in squid. So, involved in squid? One of his lesser known laurels is a Master of Squid chef, a certificate from NOAA for promoting squid as an underrepresented species. You know, ones that don't get eaten enough. Later, following his lead, Sarah and I rebranded squid as ocean chicken so that our kids would eat it. That worked, by the way. Of course, this is all part of the origin story for Grandpa Cal, as his grandkids know him by. Meanwhile, my mom was an archaeologist, among other things, which led to collections of mysterious artifacts around the house. My dad, on the other hand, contributed to the household with a teletype. For those of you from this century, a teletype is a big mechanical thing about the size of a kitchen sink. It's both a printer and a keyboard, and it makes a wonderful bzz sound with every keystroke. Bzz, bzz kind of sound. So our teletype was in my dad's office, of course, which was just below my bedroom. Imagine bzz, bzz all night. Thank you very much, Dad. As a kid, someone would invariably ask, what does your dad do? And of course, this was a bit of a tricky question for me. His home office had many books, papers, notepads full of equations. So I kind of figured he was a mathematician of some kind. One time I cornered him and asked, what do you do? And he said he was an educator. And you know, that wasn't very satisfying. Didn't really fit into any category like fireman or doctor or something like that. And it didn't match with his side hustle that involved bringing home boxes full of cookies and Coca-Cola. And now that I know more and I've met his friends, colleagues, and former students, I realize that educator is exactly what he was. He provided guidance to many and had genuine pleasure in seeing other people succeed, and a willingness to meet students and his kids at exactly their own starting point. So what was he like? He came to our soccer games. He took us hiking and camping and sailing and helped with math problems. He set a high bar to inspire to. My dad's actions taught me to listen and understand before acting. And a lesson that's driven my own parenting is to give my kids space so they can become independent and fearless as we do. So if you ask me, who is the person I admire most in the world, it would be my father. He would eat the fat clams. He ate the caterpillars my sister brought home from Africa. He let me use his tools. And he was always reliable for advice late at night at that number you just heard. What was he like? He was just right.
A remembrance in 3 parts. Laugh and the world will laugh with you. Cry and you'll dilute your beer. I'm pretty sure the beer part was my father's addition. Dad's smile was connecting. His brightness meant he was present, reassuring, and kind. And whether life was joyful or difficult or just annoying, he always portrayed optimism. Over the past year, his smile was the last way he expressed himself. And he was generous with it. O Snail, poem by Kobayashi Isa. O snail, climb Mount Fuji, but slowly, slowly. Now I'll tell you that my father was a robust workaholic, not with any disrespect. However, as his children entered college and the workforce, we all knew that if he needed to solve some obscure problem and it was past 11 p.m., he would be at the other end of the phone working too. It's a common theme here. With his young family, he had his own ways to spend quality time. In the summer of 1974, he declared a family hike up Mount Washington, in part to prove his children would be able to climb Mount Fuji in Japan the following year. At the time, I knew nothing of his plan, and I was not sure how I signed up for hiking all day. I was fairly miserable going up the mountain, and it didn't help to find a parking lot at the top. The Japan adventure marked our first family trip outside New England. And yes, my father attended a work conference during our stay. But my family had a great time, and we did climb Mount Fuji, an iconic volcano about twice the altitude of Mount Washington, but about the same hiking elevation. There was no parking lot at the top, just a stone hut where we slept the night. I was also miserable, mostly due to the altitude and the rain and the wind and my rubber raincoat, but our dad coaxed us all the way to the hut. He would say, "There's a Howard Johnson's around every corner." A saying that is as silly as it sounds, but Dad said it with unwavering optimism and determination. The next day was sunny, and I remember the path down was made of loose volcanic rock, sort of like dry dog food. It crunched and gave way as we descended. My siblings and I joyfully ran down the mountain. All right. My father once purchased a Massachusetts lobstering license so he could catch lobster. This poem is called Greatness or Intention. Take to the sea in your skiff with trap, your children bundled fore and aft. Square in center is your seat on board. So full is the craft, the oars plunge deep, a teetering buoy affixed to its keep. Yellow and blue state your plans to all. Row to the rocks when you think the best tide. Haul your chop overboard with a dazzling slide. We all see it sink slowly out of our sight. Come back later to see what you've caught, your children to follow, an emboldened lot. The greatness of your intention gifted to us all.
Growing up, I remember our parents largely left the four of us alone, with rules about school attendance, but otherwise let us do what we wanted and find our own paths. That was generally the way of the world back then. No electronic communications or helicopter parenting. Dad never talked much about what he did professionally, and we never knew much until we were older. But notable things did pop out from time to time, some of which influenced my life in various ways. I have several stories to share. First, I remember in 7th grade math class, one time they invited in parents. The teachers posed math problems to students and parents. Usually the students would crush the parents, but this being Lincoln, it turned into a contest between Ann Wang, the CEO of Wang Computers, Henry Morgan, the CEO of KLH, and our father. All three actually pulled slide rules out of their pockets. I was proud of him in our math class. Second story. Around the same time, the teletype showed up at our house. I asked my father how it worked. He handed me a book called Introduction to Fortran 4. I wrote my first program, 50 lines of code, and turned it in as a solution for some math homework. I remember the teacher had no idea what I was talking about, and it was my first encounter with a flustered teacher. It was also my first encounter with computers, which would eventually become my career. In helping write Dad's obituary, I became curious about when he first used a computer. I decided to read his PhD dissertation, which I hadn't done before. I discovered that he had written a 4,000-line program on Whirlwind, one of the world's earliest computers, and the first to do real-time modeling. Now, this was in 1953. He was one of the world's earliest programmers, was my discovery. With some AI queries, the AI has estimated that there was probably 500 to 1,000 programmers in the world at that point in time. His code that he wrote ran a model of the Grand Coulee hydroelectric dam that optimized water levels and flow rates. He wrote seminal papers on marketing models in the 60s, but he had been creating computer models in 1953. A third story. When I came home for the holidays one year, he had just bought an IBM PC. And now these had recently been launched. It only had 16K of memory and floppy disk drives. I remember he had no idea how to use it, but he knew he had to have one. It came with the basic language, and I played around writing some simple programs. Shortly thereafter, the IBM PC would become the basis for a commercial software product I had started developing. Looking back at his career, I see that a hallmark of his was noticing important trends and ideas early. But he seemed to do more. He took actions, often becoming an early adopter of things not obvious to others or seen as too ambitious, by just jumping in and figuring it out. In his last active years at MIT, he was all hot on CRISPR gene editing and the singularity. I'm not sure people took him seriously with the singularity, but there's a fighting chance he'll be proven right with the recent rise of generative AI. Some other tidbits. Bach was his favorite music, and he always had it playing at home. I asked him to a Red Sox game once, and he said, "No, I saw Ted Williams play." Dad lived on his own in Lincoln until he was 93. Exercise kept him healthy. He started jogging in the 1960s before it was a thing. When he couldn't do that anymore, he switched to bicycling and then a recumbent bicycle. He survived COVID in assisted living. He was a tough bird. When he retired at age 89, he was the oldest full faculty member at MIT by 5 years. He was still teaching, co-teaching a seminar on Little's Law, to which he had returned after 50 years. This always reminded me of a line from a T.S. Eliot poem. "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." In the end, I believe he had only one piece of unfinished work, a write-up of the merger of ORSA and TIMS, his professional organizations. I'm fairly confident because he kept a note in the kitchen of his priorities, and it was all that was left. At his MIT retirement dinner, when it was his turn to say a few words, his final words were, "It was all about the students." After our mother died, I started going over to his house regularly for dinner. We kept this up for 17 years until COVID broke it up. We ate sushi, drank his old Bordeaux together, and talked about a million things. On behalf of our family, thank you for coming out today to celebrate his life.
Thank you so much to family members and to all those who offered remembrances. We come now to a time of open sharing. So at this time, I invite anyone who would like to speak to a memory, speak to their love and connection to John, to raise your hand, and Tucker and I will come around and bring you a microphone so that you may do so.
It's on. Hi, I'm Mark Deck. First, I just wanted to thank all of John's family for making this happen and inviting others to share in the celebration of John's life. So I was one of those students that it was all about for John. I first met John when I had applied to the Sloan School in 1977 and had no idea what I was doing, but he was let's just say a kind and gentle influence, helping to kind of guide me along the way. I would say I wouldn't be in Lincoln today, probably. Trish and I wouldn't be in Lincoln without John, who I was part of a small group that was John was working with, and he would invite us regularly out to his house in Lincoln, and we would make our way out to Lincoln and say, "Wow, this is really a cool place. It would be nice to live here someday." And I even have a fairly crazy remembrance of John and the twinkle in his eye when he was showing us all this really cool Polaroid SX70 camera. I don't know if you remember that camera that collapses and opens. And we were all there drinking beer with John, and someone spilled the can of beer, and it dumped on the Polaroid SX70, which then proceeded to eject every single piece of photo paper that it had within it. And I don't know what actually became of it, but it was a key moment. Then we moved to Lincoln, and I caught up with John again later on. And I just want to say that he made a big difference in my life, and I'm very thankful for that.
Hi, I'm Len Lodish, and I have lots of memories of John, and I'm trying to quickly online in real time figure out which memories would be most relevant to everybody. But I think I'd like to talk a little bit about John's character and his values and the culture that went with John wherever he was. And it was very important. But first, I want to recognize Miriam Sherburne, who changed my life, because she was the mother hen for doctoral students at MIT. And she was the person I saw when I got to MIT for the doctoral program. And she asked me what I wanted to study there. And I told her honestly that I had been a math and economics major undergrad, and I had done 9 months of operations research and learned to program Fortran and like that, but I miss people. And she said, the first day I got to MIT, the first hour I was there, she said, you know what? You should go see John Little. You might find him interesting. So I went into his office, and he was sitting at a teletype in his office doing programming of the media planning model that he was working on. And I sat down and started to help him program because I knew how to do it. And the rest is history. We started MDS together, and I'm very glad I had $2,500 I had invested from my bar mitzvah money that I matched John's $2,500, and we started the company. And the thing I want to talk about is the culture of the company that John was really responsible for. And it was, the golden rule was one of the precepts, and the other precept was, we want to do the best job we can for our clients, and we want everybody to be able to honestly critique what everybody else is doing so we can put out the best possible product, but you cannot take it personally. And it was the way the company was run. And I remember we had knockdown, drag out battles. No, that's wrong, you should do it this way. And here's why. And we finally come up with what we thought was right. But then we'd all go out and have a beer after work, or we'd do something else together because we didn't take it personally. Our job was to do world-class analytical modeling and help our clients make money and to learn while we did it, and that's what we did. And the word in Yiddish that describes John is a mensch, and I think that's where I'll leave my remarks. John was a real mensch, and I really appreciated all the time I got to spend with him.
Hi, my name is Guru Murthy Kalyanaram. I was a student of John from a doctoral degree. Glenn was my main advisor. John Little, John Hauser, and Dick Schmalensee were on my committee. I wrote my second year paper with John, which is a tradition in MIT for the doctoral program. And that may have been the only paper that got published in a behavioral output journal of consumer research in 1994, highly cited. Everyone has said many things about John. This is, as the Reverend says, an eclectic home. And eclectics are the people, and I thought I'd say a short prayer in Sanskrit. And this is a composition of 100 verses, poems that Adi Shankara, one of the philosophers, composed. It's supposed to come straight from Shiva Kailasha. And this speaks to a union of male and female energies. Symbolically represents the individual soul and the universal spirit. Only when they merge, things will come to light, otherwise they're inert. So I'll say this prayer for John. Shivaha Shaktiya Yukto iti bhavati Shaktaha Prabhavitum na chede mam devo na kalukushalaha spandihumapi atastvam ahadyam harihara virincha divirapi pranantum stutum va katama akrita punya prabhavati.
Hello. I too was a recipient of Go See John. I think there were a lot of people at MIT who would send students to see John Little. I was with John for almost 20 years, first at MIT as an undergraduate, then a graduate. He took me in as an undergraduate when many professors would only deal with graduate students. First at MIT as an undergrad, then a grad student, and then at MDS. And I'm going to tell one little thing. Giving feedback, arguing about what's going on, arguing about one's work, that's a very, very subtle thing. And John was a master. John could tell us that we were wrong and tell us in a way that we knew that we had his respect.
My name is Gwen Loud, and my late husband and I have been neighbors of the Littles for over 50 years. We live just down the road. And I had connections with John in two particular ways. For many years, we would have little chats at 6:30 in the morning. And that was because I was out on a run before work, and he was biking. This was on Weston Road. And I only just learned a few minutes ago from what Tom said that I was probably interrupting his gathering of data about cars passing, etc. So sorry about that, John, but he never complained. And we didn't have lengthy conversations. Sometimes we would just wave in passing. But, you know, it was lighthearted. It was just such a nice, friendly way to start the day. And he would, you know, often mention that he was just back from Isle of Ho or maybe Nantucket, but then far away places. And after a while, well, you know, Weston Road became busier with traffic. And so I think his kids probably said that he should not be biking on Weston Road. So he moved to biking down Kona Road past my house. By the way, he always wore a yellow slicker, rain or shine. And so every time I put on my yellow slicker, I think of John. And one other connection we had was with salamanders. Now, those of you who live in Lincoln know that starting back in the 90s, a group of us volunteers decided, we learned about salamander, amphibian migration actually, the frogs and the salamanders moving from their winter hiding places to the vernal pools, their natal vernal pools to lay eggs. One of the largest migration spots in Lincoln was right by the Littles' house. And of course it was after dark, and you never knew when it was gonna happen, but it was always on a rainy night when the temperature was about above 39 degrees in either late March or early April. Well, John would often be out there, and I know his kids came out there, maybe grandchildren too. It was dark, so you couldn't see exactly who was there all the time, but that was a great connection too. So thanks, John, for these early morning, cheery exchanges and helping the salamanders.
My name is Fred Feinberg. John was my dissertation chair back in 1988, and I'll be brief because this is terrifying for me to talk about somebody who's meant so much to me. People will always tell you that John is brilliant, which is tautological and the understatement of the century, and he's kind, and he had this amazingly wry sense of humor. But what sticks out to me all these years later was his unparalleled sense of human observation. He was just always drinking things in and quietly processing. And he knew how to use it to guide people. So I want to share one story that lives in my memory. I was making terrible progress on my dissertation, and I was actively avoiding him because I was so scared. And one night I was leaving the Sloan building at 1 in the morning, and he was walking in, and we bumped into each other, and I was like, oh no, this is my nightmare. And he was very pleasant. He made a really nice small talk, and as we were walking away, he said, oh Fred, one more thing. And I flipped around, and he goes, when are you going to do some research? I mean, those words just still echo in my brain. Yeah, he was remarkable. In any case, I want to close with what will sound like a cliche, but John, you really made me want to be a better person.
I am Majid Abraham, who was also a doctoral student of John. And one of the things that I remember is that if you go and you ask him a question, your expectation is that he's such an expert, he's just going to respond right away. He will pause, he will think, and he will speak in very measured words, and you know that every word that he's saying has been very carefully weighed. And over time, I learned that you have to pay attention to every word because every word is well meant. one of his principles that I learned from him is parsimony. He believed that you should be parsimonious in your speech, parsimonious in your models, parsimonious in the way you explain things. You have to keep it simple. And the other thing, I mean, he obviously had tremendous academic achievement, but one of the things that he cared the most about is that they are used, that they make an impact. And he put a lot of emphasis on that by working with clients, by understanding sort of what data is around to support these models and what are the strengths and weaknesses. And eventually, I think he contributed, made a major contribution in leading the scanner data revolution, which really changed the face of marketing.
We have time for one or two more, right on the other side.
Hi, my name is Tom McNanty, and I was a colleague of John since 1971 when he hired me. I used to only get about 4 or 5 hours sleep as well. And John and I would often interact, late in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning, as somebody would say. But I just want to tell one little story to indicate John's generosity. So we were both doing a fair amount of administration, and he and I and El Silk got together. I think El was deputy dean at that time, and sort of moaning about the fact that we didn't get enough time to do research, that we were always doing all this administration. So John had the following idea. He says, why don't you go to my place in Nantucket and spend a few days there and do some research? And at that time, I don't know if you remember, but there were so-called microcomputers or little computers. It was an IBM that was about the size of a suitcase, a real suitcase. And that's what I brought down there with that. But what I just wanted to indicate that, John cared about everybody in terms of this. And here was someone who was in his field of operations research, and he thought, I can help him actually succeed in terms of the research he was doing by this really generous offer that he made. He was a very generous and he was a great man.
Thank you. Thank you to all. And please, if you have a story on your heart, make sure you share it with someone before you leave this place. We'll hold now a moment of silence, cherishing all these memories. From Shakespeare. You do look, my son, in a moved sort, as if you were dismayed. Be cheerful, sir. Our revels now are ended. These, our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, ye all which it inherits shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. And so, friends, as we entrust John to our memory, and to the embrace of time's mystery, and to the rhythms of life that remain even through death, will you join me now in the words of this blessing, this unison prayer as printed in your order of service? John, we bless you on your journey. We honor and celebrate the life that has been yours, the lives you've touched, the legacy you leave. We release old wounds and regrets. forgive and are forgiven. We cherish the life we shared, the life that is larger than us. Out of mystery we are born, and mystery receives us when we die. With sorrow and gratitude for all that has been, we bless you on your journey. which is the Stone Church building, for a reception. If you find yourself near one of the 6 windows, would you be willing to bring up one of the vases of flowers to help beautify that space? We would be most grateful. And now please receive this blessing. Life, even when it is long, is short. and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who make the journey with us. So be swift to love, and make haste to be kind. Go now in peace, joyful in the blessings of this life, and may the peace which passes all our human understanding, which the world can neither give nor take away, be among us and abide within our hearts this day and always. Amen.